A common belief is that poverty is only a shortage of cash. I have never thought that was the whole truth. Poverty is not just a number in a bank account. Poverty behaves like a gravitational force. It is a trap. It is a closed-loop system that keeps people inside, spinning their wheels until they run out of energy. In my view of it as the physics of poverty, if you want to understand why people stay stuck, you are going to have to understand rocket science. When a rocket tries to leave the Earth, it fights gravity to reach orbit. It must hit a specific speed. We call that escape velocity. If the rocket uses almost all of the fuel but still misses that speed, it does not get 99% of the way to the moon. It falls back to Earth and crashes. That is exactly what happens to a great many working people. And because you never reached escape velocity, you fall all the way back to the bottom. In truth, you often fall lower than before, because now you are discouraged, tired, and carrying even less fuel. This is why working a little harder often does not work. Inside the physics of poverty, linear effort can produce no lasting result. To break the gravitational pull, you need far more force than most people imagine. That is not because of a conspiracy, it is because of mathematics. When you are poor, almost everything costs more. You cannot buy in bulk, so you pay a higher unit price for food. You cannot afford good boots, so you buy cheap boots that break every year. You cannot afford the dentist while the problem is still small, so you wait until the tooth rots and the bill becomes far larger. If you look closely, this is what people mean when they talk about the boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. In truth, a rich man can buy one pair of high-quality boots for $50 and wear them for 10 years. At a practical level, a poor man only has $10, so he buys the cheap pair. As a practical matter, the cheap pair falls apart after 1 year, so he buys another pair the next year and another pair the year after that. From that angle, over 10 years, working class households, man spends $100. If we are honest, the rich man spent $50. At the center of it, the poor man spent twice as much money, and his feet were wet the entire time. At bottom, that is the mathematics of being poor. In simple terms, the system charges you a penalty for lacking capital. At the household level, it charges late fees. By that logic, it charges overdraft fees. Stated another way, when you look at it directly, it charges you a premium because you are perceived as a risk seen from the ground. So you are running a race with a heavy backpack while affluent households are running with the wind at their backs. Plainly, and the most dangerous part is this. Practically speaking, poverty is not only external. When you stay trapped in this loop for too long, it changes the way your brain works. It puts you into constant fight or flight mode. You stop planning for 10 years from now and start worrying about 10 minutes from now. You become reactive instead of proactive. The laws of physics can be broken if enough force is applied in the right direction. To escape, you need to understand the 5 chains holding you down. The linear income trap that wastes your time, the social gravity that pulls you back into the bucket, and the compound void that keeps you standing on the wrong side of the engine of wealth. Once you break orbit, everything changes. But first you need to survive the launch. Most people think that if you simply hand a poor person money, the problem is solved. In truth, often it does not solve the structure. At a practical level, and that is why lottery winners can receive millions and still be broke again in a few years. As a practical matter, poverty is not just a lack of cash. From that angle, it is a lack of cognitive bandwidth. If we are honest, when your mind is consumed by financial stress, your processor is damaged. You are trying to solve long-term problems with a brain stuck in survival mode. You cannot see far into the future because you are too busy fighting the present. At the center of it, that is the scarcity trap at bottom, when your bandwidth is limited, your decisions become worse. In simple terms, you take the high-interest payday loan because you need cash. Now, at the household level, you buy the unhealthy food because it is cheap and fast. Now, by that logic, it is not always stupidity. Stated another way, Very often it is exhaustion when you look at it directly, and the system knows how to exploit exhaustion, seen from the ground. This is why the first move is so plain. Practically speaking, your first financial goal is not to get rich. Your only goal at first is to save $1,000 or even $500 if that is where you really have to begin. Put it in a separate account and still do not touch it. When you have a reserve, the car breaking down becomes an inconvenience instead of a disaster. When you have a cash cushion, you plainly do not have to take the payday loan. You stop paying the scarcity tax on every emergency. You stop reacting to every disruption and start managing it. That $1,000 buys something more valuable than gold. It lets you look up from the ground and finally see the horizon. Most people try to jump straight to investing. They are trying to build a skyscraper on a swamp. You have to build the emergency reserve first. Under pressure, you have to buy the boots that last 10 years first. You may have to live like a monk for a while. If you look closely, you are buying your freedom from the scarcity tax. In truth, the second loop is the dopamine trap, a practical level. This is the emotional one. As a practical matter, people say, if you are poor, why do you have the newest phone? Why do you buy expensive sneakers? Why do you eat out when you have groceries at home? From that angle, it is easy to judge from the outside. If we are honest, it is harder to understand the biology. At the center of it, when you are trapped in the poverty loop, life hurts. Your stress is constantly high. You feel small. You feel invisible. Your brain is screaming for relief. It is screaming for a win at bottom. So when you walk into a store and buy the new pair of shoes or the branded handbag, your brain releases dopamine. For a few minutes, you feel successful. For a few minutes, the pain goes away. For a few minutes, you feel like you matter. In simple terms, that is not ordinary spending. At the household level, that is self-medication. By that logic, you are using consumption as an anesthetic to numb the pain of your reality. Stated another way, but that is the trap. When you look at it directly, the relief is temporary. Plainly, the dopamine fades in 20 minutes. Practically speaking, the credit card bill can last for years. That is one of the fundamental differences between how poor households and wealthier households often use money. The poor often see money as a way to buy relief or pleasure. The rich are more likely to see money as a way to buy optionality. When a poor person gets $500, he often asks what he can buy with it. When a rich person gets $500, he is more likely to ask how he can invest it. If you buy a designer purse, that is a liability. If you buy a share of stock, that is an asset. Most people in the low-income trap are drowning in liabilities. They are feeding the dopamine monster while starving their future, under pressure. So how do you break this loop? If you look closely, for a period of time, you cut everything. In truth, you cancel what is unnecessary. At a practical level, you stop eating out. As a practical matter, you stop buying clothes. From that angle, you stop paying for little emotional rewards. If we are honest, you strip life down to food, shelter, and basic transport. In simple terms, people may laugh at you at the household level, but you are going to have to tell yourself the truth. When you look at it directly, when you stop getting dopamine from spending, your brain starts to rewire itself. You begin getting a different kind of dopamine, the dopamine of control. You begin finding satisfaction in seeing the bank account grow. Seen from the ground, once you realize you plainly do not need the new phone to feel alive, you become dangerous. Practically speaking, because the system can no longer manipulate you with shiny objects. The third loop is the linear income trap. Most people are taught a simple equation, but there is a fatal flaw in that equation. You only have 24 hours in a day, and your body has limits. That means your income is mathematically capped. This brings us to one of the silent killers of the working class. Inflation is a tax on people who sell their time. When money is printed and prices rise, bread costs more and gas costs more, but wages simply do not adjust immediately. Wages are sticky. Your boss may wait a year or two before giving you a 3% raise, and by then inflation may already have eaten far more than that. Under pressure, you miss your child's birthday. And at the end of the year, you can be poorer than when you started. You cannot win that game simply by playing harder. If you look closely, you have to stop selling time alone and start selling value. In truth, that is how you build a skill stack. At a practical level, most people try to become the best at one crowded thing as a practical matter that is hard and crowded. From that angle, a better move is often to become pretty good at 2 or 3 unrelated skills and combine them. If we are honest, that is how someone like Scott Adams became unique. He was not the best artist, not the funniest writer, not the best businessman, but he was good at all 3, and the combination made him unusual. The center of it. If you are a low-income worker, do not really just get a second job flipping burgers. In simple terms, use your monk mode time to learn a second skill. The household level. If you work construction, learn sales. By that logic, now you are not just labor. Stated another way, you are a contractor who can close deals. When you look at it directly, if you are a waiter, learn copywriting. Seen from the ground, now you are not only carrying food, plainly, you can also design menus that sell high-margin items. Practically speaking, you must become a double threat. When you stack skills, you detach your income from your hours. You become an asset rather than a commodity. The market pays for rarity more reliably than it pays for effort. If you can be replaced by a teenager or a robot in a week, you will remain vulnerable. You have to build a moat around your income. There is an old saying that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If your closest friends are broke, cynical, and unambitious, that environment will shape you. Human beings are imitation machines. We copy the language, behavior, and mindset of the tribe around us. So if you are trying to escape poverty while surrounded by people who have accepted poverty, you are fighting a very hard battle. That is exactly why the crab bucket image matters. Put 1 crab in a bucket, and it may crawl out. Put 10 crabs in the same bucket. And when one tries to escape, the others pull it back down. They plainly do not do it because they are all evil. They do it because your success makes them feel unsafe. Under pressure, your escape highlights their imprisonment. When you start monk mode, when you start saving money, when you start learning new skills, your old friends may not applaud. They may say you think you are better than them. If you look closely, they may say the game is rigged. So why bother? In truth, that is the sound of social gravity. A practical level, that is the bucket trying to keep you inside, as a practical matter, so you must protect your mind. From that angle, I am not saying you are going to have to be cruel to the people you love. If we are honest, I am saying you cannot let poisonous inputs occupy your whole day. At the center of it, you need a better tribe. At bottom, and because you live in the age of the internet, that tribe does not have to live next door. In simple terms, you can spend your time with better minds through books, interviews, biographies, and lectures at the household level. You can read Munger, stated another way. You can read the greatest builders in history. When you look at it directly, when you do that, you are downloading a new operating system into your brain. Seen from the ground, you are choosing better standards. Plainly, you are choosing better mirror neurons. Practically speaking, a new mental neighborhood often comes before a new physical neighborhood. If you are trapped in the poverty loop, you are probably standing on the wrong side of this equation. You have credit card debt at 20%. Every day you wake up, you are poorer than the night before, even if you did not spend a dime. You are paddling upstream, and the current is stronger than your arms. Every day they wake up richer than the night before, even if they slept all day. If you want to escape low income, you must stop being the person who pays interest and start becoming the person who earns it. If you look closely, you use your monk mode savings to pay off high interest debt. In truth, you kill the vampire that is sucking your blood. A practical level, stage 2 is accumulation. As a practical matter, this is where you start buying assets. From that angle, not a house you cannot afford. If we are honest, not a car you cannot sustain. At the center of it, productive ownership. At bottom, take $10 a day, just $10, and put it into a low-cost index fund. At the household level, ignore the flashy trends. By that logic, buy a piece of the economy and let it grow. Stated another way, you are building your own snowball. When you look at it directly, it will look small at first. Seen from the ground, it will even look pathetic. Practically speaking, stage 3 is freedom. This is the moment when your assets generate enough cash flow or support to cover your basic survival needs. This is the moment you break the gravitational pull. This is the moment you no longer have to sell your time just to stay alive. If I review the whole poverty loop, I see the same 5 chains. The strongest ones are forged in the mind. The door to the cage is not locked forever. Your friends may want you to stay inside. Under pressure, your own fear certainly wants you to stay inside. But the physics can still work in your favor. That is one reason the trap feels so demoralizing. If you look closely, the person inside it is not only losing money. At a practical level, and once momentum is lost, even a simple setback feels heavier than it should feel. A family that had almost started believing in progress suddenly has proof, at least emotionally, that progress is fragile. That emotional cost is part of the mathematics too. Discouragement changes behavior, fear changes timing, exhaustion changes judgment. All of those things make the next mistake more likely. As a practical matter, that is one reason I see it this way. Poverty should be discussed with more precision. From that angle, people talk about it morally when they should often talk about it mechanically. If we are honest, the poor are not always losing because they refuse to move. At the center of it, very often they are losing because the slope is steeper than outsiders. Imagine because their margin for error is smaller than outsiders imagine, and because the price of one mistake is larger than outsiders. Imagine a bottom. When you finally see that clearly, a lot of cheap advice starts to sound cheap. In simple terms, the line that poverty is expensive is not rhetoric. At the household level, it is description. By that logic, it means the household without cash reserve is forced into bad timing over and over again. It means the person who could not afford the larger package pays more per heat, more per ounce, more per m-onth, and more per year. It means the household that could not afford durable quality is sentenced to repeated replacement. It means weakness is not only painful, weakness is billable. Stated another way, for that reason a cash buffer matters so much. When you look at it directly, most people hear the phrase emergency fund and think it sounds small. Seen from the ground, I see it this way: the first reserve is one of the biggest psychological upgrades a household can buy. Plainly, $1,000 does not solve all of life. It interrupts panic. It does something more foundational than that. It reduces the number of decisions that have to be made from fear. It gives the household one precious ability that poor households often lack. It gives them the ability to pause. Practically speaking, that pause changes everything. A person who can choose can finally act like a planner instead of a victim of the next interruption. And that is how the scarcity tax begins losing some of its power. The closed poverty loop is not broken in one leap. The dopamine trap is weakened the same way. I see it this way: many people underestimate how humiliating a trapped life can feel. A nice object can feel like a correction. When a person feels overlooked long enough, the desire to buy some visible symbol of worth becomes very strong. It can feel like proof that you are not invisible. It can feel like evidence that you are not losing. This is why this kind of spending can look irrational to outsiders and still feel emotionally necessary to the buyer. But necessity is not the same as usefulness. Discipline is not mainly self-punishment. Discipline is choosing not to let a temporary emotional need become a long-term financial wound. It is choosing not to buy one evening of relief with 2 years of monthly obligations. It is choosing not to let identity be rented from brands, financed cars, and little performances of status. And that is why monk mode can be so powerful. It is about changing the source of reward. If the brain can stop celebrating the shopping bag and start celebrating the growing reserve, then the whole inner economy shifts. Saving starts feeling satisfying. Debt reduction starts feeling satisfying. simplicity starts feeling satisfying. Once that happens, the market loses one of its easiest ways to manipulate a person. The linear income trap has a similar cruelty. It flatters effort while quietly exhausting the worker. A person can feel honorable because he is working non-stop and still be losing ground in real terms. That makes the trap emotionally deceptive. The worker feels productive. The household feels stretched. Both things are true at once. The effort is real. The result is weak. That is exactly why the equation has to be changed. The skill stack is not just a career trick. Under pressure, it is a survival strategy. It is how a person increases the value of the hour without increasing the number of hours forever. It is how a worker begins to convert labor into leverage. It is how income begins to rise without demanding a matching increase in exhaustion. Once that shift starts, the household finally gains room to do something more than merely endure. Without room, all money is spoken for before it even arrives. If you look closely, with room, a little capital can finally be directed toward an asset instead of toward another emergency. In truth, and then the compounding equation starts to change. At a practical level, the social gravity section matters because almost no one climbs alone. As a practical matter, a person may understand the math perfectly and still be dragged backward by the emotional pressure of a weak environment. If everyone near you mocks discipline, then discipline begins to feel like arrogance. If everyone near you worships appearances, then a plain life begins to feel like failure, even when it is financially wise. This is why the environment around the mind has to be treated as part of the budget. Bad inputs create bad decisions, just as surely as high-interest debt does. From that angle, a better tribe does not always arrive immediately in physical form. If we are honest, sometimes it begins as a reading habit. At the center of it, sometimes it begins as a voice in an interview. At bottom, sometimes it begins as a biography that gives a person a more mature standard than the one available in the room around him. In simple terms that may sound abstract, at the household level, it is not abstract. When you look at it directly, standards become behavior. Seen from the ground, behavior becomes outcomes. Plainly, that is one reason better ideas are not a luxury purchase. They are part of the escape plan, practically speaking. Then, finally, the household reaches the compound void. This is where everything either starts helping or keeps hurting. A family that keeps paying 20% interest is not simply servicing debt. It is feeding a machine that gets stronger while the family sleeps. A family that begins even the smallest habit of buying productive holdings is not merely investing. It is beginning to move to the better side of a machine that also gets stronger while the family sleeps. People want freedom first because freedom is the most, but room rests on survival and accumulation, the way a roof rests on walls. If the walls are not there, the roof is fantasy. Survival means the household stops leaking. Accumulation means the household finally starts owning. Freedom means enough ownership exists that labor is no longer the only pillar holding up the whole life. In my view, many people become impatient right there. They want the snowball to look impressive too early. But snowballs are never impressive in the beginning. They are only impressive to people who understand what repetition can do. $10 a day looks absurd to a person who worships spectacle. It looks serious to a person who understands compounding. The same is true of debt reduction. Small progress looks boring in the month it is made. Over years, boring progress becomes a different life. For that reason, the final summary matters so much. Once a person sees these chains clearly, his problems stop looking random. The loop becomes visible. And when the loop becomes visible, the exit begins to look real, under pressure. And once a person has a map, a real map, he no longer has to confuse motion with progress. He can start applying force in the right places. For that reason, I would always choose clarity over comfort. Comfort without clarity keeps people trapped. Clarity, even when it hurts, gives a person the chance to build the force required for escape. In the end, the real victory is not simply having more money. If you look closely, it is standing outside the loop. In truth, It is looking at life and knowing one bill cannot destroy the month. At a practical level, it is knowing one employer cannot destroy the year. As a practical matter, it is knowing that time, once the enemy has finally become from that angle. That is what orbit means in ordinary life. If we are honest, that is what escape velocity buys. At the center of it, and that is why I would say this subject matters far more than most people realize.